The night was heavy with rain, the kind that painted the streets with silver and made the neon signs blur like soft watercolors. A small diner sat on the corner of the road, its red sign flickering against the wet darkness. Inside, the place was quiet, almost forgotten by the world, except for the gentle hum of an old jukebox and the smell of frying oil. It was here that a man stepped inside, pushing the door open slowly, as though he did not want to be noticed. He wore a plain gray jacket, a pair of jeans that looked older than they were, and a baseball cap pulled so low that half of his face was hidden. To anyone watching, he seemed like just another tired traveler searching for a warm meal on a cold night. No one would ever imagine that behind this simple disguise stood Ethan Cole, a man whose name filled newspapers, business magazines, and headlines around the world. Ethan was a billionaire, the kind who built empires out of ideas and transformed them into companies that touched millions of lives. He had private jets, glass towers with his name on them, and a fortune so large that most people could not even dream of it. Yet tonight, none of that mattered. He was not here as the untouchable man people admired or envied. He was here as someone else entirely, someone who just wanted to sit in peace, order a simple burger, and remember what it felt like to be ordinary. He walked slowly to a corner booth, far away from the light and chatter of the counter. The leather seat creaked under his weight as he sat down, and for a moment he simply closed his eyes, listening to the sound of rain tapping against the diner's windows. His life had been filled with noise, meetings, interviews, phone calls, that never ended, but here there was silence. And in that silence he felt something stir inside him, something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Loneliness. Ethan had not come here only for the food. He had come here to escape. After his wife passed away 2 years ago, his world had turned into a prison made of glass and gold. Everyone looked at him with admiration, but nobody saw the grief hidden in his eyes. He was surrounded by people who wanted his money, his power, or his influence. Yet not one of them asked him if he was okay. Not one of them noticed the empty space beside him at night. And so he wore a disguise, slipped into an ordinary diner, and searched for something he could not even name. The waitress at the counter barely looked up when he came in. She had seen too many faces, too many travelers. To her, he was just another man. That strangely brought him comfort. For the first time in years, he was invisible. For the first time in years, he was just someone. When the waiter approached his table, Ethan lifted his head. The man was tall, with dark skin, tired eyes, and a smile that carried both warmth and weariness. His uniform was old. The white shirt faded at the edges, but he wore it with quiet dignity. He looked like someone who had carried heavy burdens, but still managed to stand upright. "Good evening, sir," the waiter said politely, holding his notepad. "What can I get for you tonight?" Ethan hesitated. The menu was on the table, but he didn't open it. He already knew what he wanted. Something simple, something real. Something that reminded him of a time before the world knew his name. "I'll have a burger," he said softly. His voice was almost a whisper, as if he were afraid the walls might recognize him. The waiter nodded and wrote it down. "With fries, or just the burger?" "Just the burger," Ethan replied. Then after a pause he added, "Thank you." Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Ethan felt something he could not explain. There was a gentleness in the man's gaze, something human, something unguarded. It was not the look of a person who wanted anything from him. It was the look of someone who simply saw another human being, and for reasons Ethan could not understand, it made his chest feel heavy. As the waiter walked away, Ethan leaned back in the booth, staring out at the rain. The glass fogged with his breath, and for the first time in a long time, he let out a quiet sigh. He had come here for a burger, but already something inside told him that this night would give him much more than food. The kitchen bell rang softly in the distance, and the low hum of the jukebox filled the silence. The diner was nearly empty, only 2 truck drivers at the far end sipping coffee and a young couple whispering in a booth. The rain outside kept most people at home, but for those who came in, this little diner was a shelter. The waiter returned to the corner booth where Ethan sat. His footsteps were heavy but steady, like a man who had walked too many long shifts. His name tag read, Marcus, though the letters were scratched and fading. His shoes looked worn, his shirt tired, yet there was something in the way he carried himself, a kind of quiet strength, as if life had tried to break him but failed. Marcus placed a glass of water on the table. "Here you go, sir. Burger will be out soon." Ethan nodded. "Thank you." Marcus studied him for only a second longer than usual. He had seen countless faces in his years at the diner. Hungry travelers, lonely drifters, tired workers. But this man, there was something in his eyes. Not just fatigue, not just stress. Something deeper. Something heavy. Like grief buried behind silence. He didn't ask questions. He simply offered a small smile, the kind of smile that cost nothing, but could mean everything. Then he walked away to check on the other tables. Ethan watched him. He noticed the faint tremor in the man's hands as he poured coffee for the truck drivers, the careful way he leaned down to listen to the couple's order, the respectful patience in his tone. Marcus was not a man of luxury, not a man who owned glass towers or billion-dollar companies, but he carried a dignity Ethan rarely saw in the boardrooms of the powerful. Minutes passed, and soon Marcus returned with a steaming plate. He placed the burger gently in front of Ethan as though serving more than food. Along with the plate, he slid a folded piece of paper underneath, his movement almost hidden, like a secret. Ethan blinked. He looked up at Marcus, confused. The waiter gave a small nod, almost too subtle to notice, and whispered, "Please, read it later." Then he straightened, cleared his throat, and spoke louder, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Enjoy your meal, sir." He walked away, leaving Ethan staring at the folded paper. For a long moment, Ethan didn't touch his food. His hands hovered near the plate, but his attention was locked on the note. He had lived in a world where people always wanted something from him. Business deals, contracts, investments. Notes slipped into his hand usually meant demands or desperate requests. But this was different. Marcus had given it to him quietly, almost carefully, as if protecting him from something. Ethan hesitated. He could feel his chest tighten. What could possibly be written in that small piece of paper? He decided to wait. He picked up the burger instead. The first bite was simple, warm, and real. It tasted like memory, like late nights before his fortune, when he and his wife used to stop at diners after long drives. Back then, life was small but full. Now it was big but empty. He chewed slowly, every bite pulling him further back into those lost moments. Across the room, Marcus moved from table to table. He greeted customers with the same tired smile, refilled coffee cups, and scribbled orders. But every so often, his eyes flickered back to Ethan as if making sure he had seen the note. Ethan noticed, and something stirred inside him, an unusual warmth mixed with fear. Why would a stranger care enough to write him something? What could a stranger even see in him? As he finished half the burger, he finally picked up the folded paper. His fingers trembled slightly as he held it, and for the first time in many years, Ethan felt nervous. Not as a businessman, not as a billionaire, but simply as a man about to be seen. The folded paper rested on the table like it carried a secret, too heavy for its size. Ethan stared at it while the rain kept drumming against the windows. The lights of the diner flickered faintly, as though even the world outside was waiting for him to open it. He reached for it once, then pulled his hand back. He wasn't sure why, perhaps because he was afraid. For years, every message sent his way had been about money, business, or opportunity. People never wrote him words unless they wanted something. But this note had come from a man who didn't know who he was. Finally, Ethan unfolded it slowly, his heart beating faster than it had in a long time. The handwriting was rough, uneven, but filled with an honesty that made it hard to look away. He read each line carefully, almost whispering the words to himself. "Sir, I don't know who you are, but I see sadness in your eyes. I lost my son last year. He was about your age. He loved burgers too. If you're hurting, please remember, no storm lasts forever. A stranger cares about you tonight. Ethan froze. His chest tightened as if the words had reached into him and pulled out something he had tried to bury. The air around him seemed heavier, and suddenly the diner wasn't just a quiet place anymore. It was a mirror reflecting the loneliness he had been hiding. He put the note down, but his hand stayed on it. His throat burned, his eyes stung. For years he had kept his grief locked behind closed doors. The world saw him as strong, powerful, unshakable. But here, a stranger, a waiter, had seen through his disguise in a single glance. Memories rushed back. His wife's laugh, the way she used to reach for his hand when they walked. The empty bed that felt colder every night. The silence of his penthouse, where every room echoed with absence. He had thought he had mastered the art of hiding his pain. He thought nobody could see it. But Marcus had. Ethan looked up. Across the diner, Marcus was pouring coffee for the truck drivers, nodding politely at their jokes. He carried himself, like any other worker, but Ethan knew now. This man had carried loss heavier than most could bear. And still he found the strength to notice pain in someone else. Still he found the kindness to reach out. Ethan gripped the note tighter. It wasn't long or complicated, but it was real, and real was something money could never buy. For a while he didn't eat. He just sat there staring at the rain outside, replaying the words over and over in his head. A stranger cares about you tonight. It broke something in him, but it also healed something too. When Marcus passed by again, Ethan spoke softly. "Excuse me." Marcus paused, his notepad in hand. "Yes, sir?" Ethan hesitated. He wanted to say so many things. He wanted to tell him who he really was. He wanted to tell him about the nights he spent drowning in silence, the mornings where getting out of bed felt impossible. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, all he managed was a quiet, "Thank you for this." He tapped the folded note with his finger. Marcus's eyes softened. He gave a small nod as though understanding that sometimes gratitude didn't need many words. Then he simply said, "I'm glad you read it." And he walked away, leaving Ethan with a feeling he hadn't known in years, being truly seen. The burger grew cold on the plate, untouched. But Ethan didn't care. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't just a billionaire, a businessman, or a name in the headlines. He was a man whose pain had been noticed. A man who realized that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as invisible as he thought. Ethan sat in silence long after Marcus walked away. The little note lay folded on the table again, but its words echoed in his heart like a bell that would not stop ringing. No storm lasts forever. A stranger cares about you tonight. Those words had touched a place inside him that he had kept locked for years. They were simple, yet they carried the weight of truth, the kind of truth he had almost forgotten existed. For the first time in a long time, he wanted to talk. Not about money, not about work, not about headlines, but about the ache inside, him that no one ever saw. When Marcus passed by again, Ethan's voice broke the quiet. Would you sit with me for a moment?" Marcus blinked, surprised. Customers rarely asked him that. Most only wanted food, a refill, or the check. He looked around. There were no new customers, only the same truck drivers laughing softly at the counter and the young couple still whispering in their booth. After a short pause, he nodded. "All right, just for a minute." He slid into the booth across from Ethan, resting his tired hands on the table. Up close, Ethan could see the lines on his face, not from age, but from struggle. Marcus looked like a man who had fought battles no one clapped for. Ethan cleared his throat. I read your note, and I don't know why, but it felt like you were speaking straight into me." Marcus's eyes softened, but he didn't interrupt. Ethan hesitated. Words had always been his weapon in business. Sharp, quick, persuasive. But now they felt heavy. "I lost my wife 2 years ago," he said finally, his voice low. "She was my anchor. And ever since I've been walking through life like a ghost, surrounded by people yet completely alone. The confession surprised even him. He had not told this to strangers. He had not even told it to friends. But tonight, it slipped out like a truth that had been waiting to be freed. Marcus listened quietly, his eyes steady, his presence calm. Then he nodded, slowly. "I know that emptiness," he said. His own voice carried the sound of a man who had wept silently many nights. "My son died last year, drunk driver. He was only 24. Ethan's chest tightened. He whispered, "I'm so sorry." Marcus gave a small, weary smile. "I write those notes because sometimes when I see pain in someone's face, I feel like my son would want me to remind them they're not alone. Writing helps me heal, and maybe it gives someone else a little strength too." The table fell into silence. Not uncomfortable silence, but the kind where two souls recognize each other's wounds. Ethan stared at his hands. For years he had been surrounded by boardrooms, numbers, deals worth millions. None of it had filled the hole inside him. But here, in a small diner with a waiter who had lost his son, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Connection. "I don't usually talk like this," Ethan admitted, his voice softer now. "But you saw me. No one sees me anymore, not really." Marcus nodded again. "Sometimes it takes one broken heart to notice another." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. His eyes stung and he had to look away toward the rain outside so Marcus wouldn't see the tears forming. For years he had been praised for being unshakable. Tonight he felt fragile, and yet, in that fragility, there was strange comfort. They sat like that for a few more minutes, two men from different worlds, one with wealth beyond imagination, the other with nothing more than dignity and grief, sharing the same quiet table, sharing the same silent pain. When Marcus finally stood to return to work, he placed a hand gently on the table. "Eat your burger before it gets too cold," he said with a faint smile. Ethan gave a small laugh, the first genuine laugh that had left his lips in months. It wasn't loud, but it carried warmth. "I will," he promised. And for the first time in years, he wasn't just a man eating alone in a diner. He was a human being who had been seen, understood, and reminded that broken hearts could still reach out to each other in the dark. Ethan sat in the booth long after Marcus had gone back to work. The burger sat half-eaten on his plate, the fries untouched, but his mind was far away. The little diner with its humming lights and faint smell of coffee felt less like a place for food and more like a place where two lives had quietly collided. He kept hearing Marcus's words again and again. "My son died last year. Drunk driver. He was only 24. There was no anger in the way Marcus had said it, no bitterness, only a tired sadness that ran deep. Ethan thought of the strength it must take to keep working, to smile at strangers, to carry coffee to tables while carrying such grief inside. And still Marcus had noticed him. Still, he had written a note for a stranger. Ethan touched the folded piece of paper again, running his fingers across the rough edges. He had received thousands of letters in his life, requests for donations, invitations to charity events, business proposals disguised as heartfelt messages. But none of them had ever reached him the way this simple note had. He realized something then. Marcus had given him a gift that money could never buy, a gift of honesty, a gift of care. And in return, Ethan felt an urge growing inside him, not just to say thank you, but to do something that could change this man's life the way his words had changed Ethan's heart tonight. Marcus passed by his table again, carrying a tray with 2 slices of pie for the couple in the corner. Ethan watched him closely. His back was straight, his movements careful, but his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of a man who had cried quietly in the dark, then wiped the tears and gone back to work because life gave him no choice. When Marcus glanced at him, Ethan quickly looked down at his plate. But Marcus smiled anyway, that same tired yet gentle smile before returning to the counter. Ethan took a deep breath. He wanted to tell Marcus who he really was. He wanted to say, "I'm not just some man in a diner. I have the power to change your life." But something stopped him. Maybe it was fear. Fear that Marcus would treat him differently once he knew. Or maybe it was respect. Ethan didn't want to ruin the rare honesty they had shared. So instead, he stayed quiet. But in his silence, a plan began to form. He thought of Marcus's son, a young man who never got the chance to live out his dreams. Ethan thought of his own fortune, money that sat in accounts, money that sometimes felt more like a burden than a blessing. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan saw a clear purpose for it. He could help Marcus, not with sympathy, but with something lasting. The rain outside slowed, turning from a heavy storm to a gentle drizzle. The couple in the corner laughed softly over their pie. The truck drivers paid their bill and left, the door jingling as they stepped into the wet night. The diner grew, quieter, emptier, leaving only Ethan and Marcus in the room. Marcus began wiping down tables, humming softly to himself. His voice was low, almost broken, but steady. Ethan watched him, feeling a strange mixture of admiration and sadness. This man had lost so much, yet he was still standing, still serving others. Ethan leaned back in the booth and whispered to himself, "He deserves more. So much more." At that moment, Ethan knew that tonight would not end with just a thank you. He would make sure Marcus's kindness did not go unrewarded. The note had saved Ethan from drowning in his loneliness. Now it was Ethan's turn to give something back, something that could carry Marcus through his own storm. And in that quiet diner, under the dim lights, a silent promise was made. The diner grew quieter as the night stretched on. The young couple had left, their laughter fading into the rain outside. The truck drivers had gone too, their coffee cups empty. Now, only Ethan and Marcus remained, with the soft hum of the jukebox filling the silence. Ethan sat in the booth, staring at the cold burger in front of him. He wasn't thinking about food anymore. His mind was fixed on the man who had handed him that little note, the man who had reminded him he was still human. When Marcus came by to wipe the next table, Ethan finally spoke. "Marcus," he said softly, his voice carrying more weight than usual. The waiter looked up, surprised that the stranger knew his name. Then he remembered the faded name tag pinned to his shirt. "Yes, sir. Did you need anything else?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then reached into his jacket. His fingers brushed against the envelope he had prepared, thick, heavy, filled with something more valuable than just cash. He pulled it out slowly and placed it on the table. Marcus frowned, confused. "What's this?" "Please," Ethan said quietly. "Just take it. But before you open it, I need to tell you something." Marcus slid into the booth across from him, curiosity in his eyes. Ethan took a deep breath and reached up to remove his baseball cap. For the first time that night, his face was fully visible under the dim diner lights. Marcus's eyes widened. His breath caught in his throat. He recognized him instantly. Ethan Cole, the billionaire, the man whose face appeared on magazines, television, and news reports, the man people talked about as if he were untouchable. Marcus shook his head slowly. You're him?" Ethan gave a sad smile. "I am. But tonight I just wanted to be someone else. Tonight I just wanted to eat a burger in peace." Marcus leaned back, stunned. The room felt suddenly smaller, as if the air itself was heavy with disbelief. Ethan pushed the envelope toward him. "Inside you'll find enough to pay off your debts. And more than that, you'll find papers for a scholarship. It will be named after your son. His name will live on, helping young people chase their dreams." For a moment, Marcus didn't move. His hands shook as he stared at the envelope. Why would you do this for me?" he whispered. Ethan's voice cracked as he answered, "Because your note saved me tonight. You reminded me that I'm not invisible. You reminded me that storms don't last forever, and I can't let that kind of kindness go unanswered." Tears filled Marcus's eyes. He pressed a hand to his forehead, as if trying to steady himself. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Ethan replied gently. This isn't charity, this is gratitude. You gave me something real tonight, I want to give something real back. Marcus finally opened the envelope, his hands trembling. Inside he saw the check, the documents for the scholarship, and a handwritten note from Ethan himself. For your son, for your kindness, for reminding me what matters. The tears he had been holding back slipped down his cheeks. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. All he could manage was, "Thank you. Not for the money, but for remembering my boy." Ethan reached across the table and placed his hand firmly on Marcus's. "No, thank you. You reminded me I'm still human." The two men sat in silence, their hands joined across the worn table. Outside, the rain had stopped and the night sky began to clear. For Ethan, it felt like the first dawn after a long storm. For Marcus, it felt like his son's memory had just been given wings. And in that quiet diner, two broken hearts found healing, not in wealth or in power, but in the simple kindness of being seen. The envelope still lay on the table between them, heavy with meaning. Marcus stared at it as if it were something unreal, something too large for his tired hands to hold. He had served food to strangers all his life, but he had never imagined a night like this. Ethan watched him quietly. For years, people had looked at him with hunger in their eyes, hunger for wealth, power, or favors. But Marcus's eyes were different. They carried shock, yes, and gratitude, but also something pure, a kind of respect that had nothing to do with money. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words, the kind that carried healing inside it. Finally, Marcus wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. "I don't know how to thank you," he said softly. "But what matters most is that my boy's name won't be forgotten. That means more than anything." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then it's worth it. His memory will live on, not just in your heart, but in the lives of others who will get a chance because of him." For the first time that night, Marcus's tired smile grew brighter. It wasn't the forced smile he gave customers. It was real, alive, filled with both pain and pride. The clock above the counter ticked toward midnight. The diner was quiet, its lights humming softly. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, and the wet streets reflected the glow of the street lamps. It felt as if the storm had ended not just in the sky but in their hearts too. Ethan finally stood, pulling his jacket tighter around him. He reached for his cap, then stopped. Instead of hiding his face again, he left it resting on the table. Tonight he didn't need to disguise himself anymore. Tonight he had been seen for who he truly was. Marcus rose too, still holding the envelope as though it were fragile glass. "Sir, Ethan," he corrected himself awkwardly. "You don't know what this means to me. I'll never forget tonight." Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder, firm and steady. "Neither will I. You gave me something no one else has given me in years. You saw me. Not the billionaire, not the man in the headlines. Just me." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "Sometimes that's all we need, to be seen." Ethan nodded. "Exactly." They stood like that for a moment. Two men from worlds so different that they should have never met, yet bound now by something stronger than money or fame, shared pain, and shared humanity. When Ethan finally walked to the door, Marcus followed him with his eyes. He looked at the billionaire, no longer as a distant figure from the news, but as a man who carried grief just like him. At the door, Ethan paused and looked back one last time. His voice was quiet, but filled with warmth. "Take care of yourself, Marcus, and take care of your son's memory. You've already honored him more than you know." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. His hands tightened around the envelope, his heart heavy but full. Then Ethan stepped out into the night. The air was fresh, washed clean by the rain. The city lights sparkled on the wet streets, and for the first time in years, he felt lighter, as if the burden of loneliness had been lifted, even just a little. Inside the diner, Marcus stood alone, the envelope pressed against his chest. He whispered softly, almost like a prayer. "You see that, son? Your name will live on. And in that small, forgotten diner, something powerful had happened. A disguised billionaire had come in searching for a simple burger, and a grieving father had given him hope. In return, the billionaire had given the father's son a legacy. Two strangers had walked into each other's lives that rainy night, carrying wounds the world could not see, and they walked out different men, no longer alone, no longer invisible. Sometimes healing does not come from wealth or power. Sometimes it comes from a simple note slipped under a plate. And that night, in the quiet hum of a roadside diner, two broken hearts found light again.